My guest today is a clinical nutritionist with a passion for women's health that stemmed from her own health journey and the suffering she experienced from a very young age that many of us are told is a normal part of our cycles, when in fact, it's actually our body telling us something is wrong. Having had an instinctive inkling herself that something was just not quite right, my guest started researching and delving into women's health in order to support her own healing journey. What she found came as a shock. The more she learned, the more she realized how little she knew about her own body, and equally shocked to discover how little the women in her life and those she saw in clinic knew about the way their body worked or how to create balance within it. My guest is a true health enthusiast. She is a nature lover, a passionate woman on a mission to make talking about hormonal health sexy again. Was it ever sexy? I don't know that it was, but she wants to make it sexy. And after today, I feel like she might be on the right path. She's authored 2 books, Nourishing Those Who Nurture, a preconception guide, and a postpartum support book. And in this episode, we unpack the 4 seasons of a woman's cycle, what happens within those cycles, and how our cycles are connected to that of the moon. Enjoy the episode. Hello, listeners. Thanks for joining another episode of the Skin I'm In podcast. I'm your host, Chanel, and this is a place where women can tune in to gain peace through clarity, purpose through inspiration, and the permission to be themselves through the stories of other women. If you're enjoying these episodes so far, click the like, share, and subscribe button so that more women like you can be positively impacted by the stories in this podcast. Welcome to the Skin I'm In podcast, Tahlia. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm so well. We've been trying to have this convo for a little while now. There's so much about you, your health journey, your birthing experiences, so many things that I want to unpack. But what I think I love the most about, when we first caught up and the thing that makes me really passionate about this conversation specifically is your health journey and how you got to where you are, because you now help other women with the things that you went through. So let's talk about some of the things that you were, I don't want to say suffering with, because it's such a suffering, but it is suffering. So PCOS, which so many women can relate to.
Yes.
And I'm going to have a real go at pronouncing amenorrhea and dysmenorrhea. There we go. Cysts, you miscarried, hormonal acne, all the bells and whistles women get. Yeah. So what was going on, and what shift occurred that you're like, stuff this, I'm taking the healing journey into my own hands?
So basically from when I started menstruating, which for me was a little bit later than most of my friends at the time, which can be very PCOS-y. That's quite normal for the people who potentially have PCOS to menstruate a little bit later. So I was around 15. And basically from the get-go, I started, so for those that don't actually know the terms, what they mean that you just said, because there's probably a lot of listeners that don't, I started with dysmenorrhea. And basically that is really painful cycles. So it was so much pain that I would take days off school. I would sometimes be vomiting. I would definitely have to spend like at least that first day resting, and sometimes the second day. And it's so interesting. So, I'm 38 now, so this was quite a while ago. And of course, we went to the doctors, which is what we did back then, as soon as this started happening. And, it's just seen as a normal part of having your cycle. So FYI, having pain in the cycle is not normal. It's a red flag that there's something going on. And it's so amazing how so many of these symptoms that women experience have been normalized as just being part of having a menstrual cycle, or part of postpartum, or part of pregnancy, or part of perimenopause. So I had dysmenorrhea basically until I started taking things into my own hands. So that was probably in my early to mid 20s. So I had dysmenorrhea, I had hormonal acne. So basically, it didn't cover my entire face, but definitely in the hormonal region. And sometimes I would have it on my chest and also on my back. In my very early 20s, I went through a stage of amenorrhea. So that is the loss of your cycle for more than 3 months. So I think it was for around about 18 months that I experienced that. And again, my mum took me to our local GP, and she wasn't concerned about it at all because I had been diagnosed with PCOS at that point, which does mean that your cycle can be a little bit all over the place. And it was so I was diagnosed with PCS around about the age of 19. And when I was diagnosed with PCOS, I remember it being a horrendous day. I was with my mom, went and had the ultrasound. They told me I had, so many cysts on my ovaries. And they basically said to me that you may fall pregnant, but your chance of actually having a baby is not very good. And then I went straight to the doctors a couple of days later, and she said, well, all we can do for that is put you on the pill. And I just remember thinking, wow. So before I actually understood my body properly, and before I actually understood PCOS and all these things, I carried this story that I wouldn't be able to have children, and that this was my life, and that I just needed to continue doing this, and there really was no cure for me because so I had tried OCP, so oral contraceptive pill, I think around the age of 16, and immediately I'm so grateful that I actually had some intuition with my body, and that was probably because I was very lucky in growing up in a household that were health conscious to an extent, and my parents were really health conscious. And we went to a lot of naturopaths and herbalists and all those things growing up, as well as the doctor. So I had a little bit of intuition about what was going on. And when I did actually trial the OCP, I felt my emotions, my mood switch instantly. And I remember thinking, this isn't for me. So when I went to my doctor after the PCOS diagnosis, and they said basically the only way you can cure this is through taking the pill, which, by the way, is not a cure for anything. Unless you're experiencing very painful periods with perhaps endometriosis and you're needing to alleviate that pain, perhaps, but it doesn't cure. It will just mask what the problem is. So I was grateful looking back that I had already trialed the pill and it hadn't worked for me, and I wasn't about to give it a go again. So I'm grateful that I had that experience and that I didn't, because God knows how many years I perhaps would have been on the pill then, and the amount of things that can then cause, subsequently, which I think you've spoken to someone on your podcast previously about the OCP a little bit more. I'm pretty sure I listened to that episode. So we won't go into it too much. But yeah, so it was in my, I think, early to mid 20s. I was studying nutrition and psychology at university. And I guess this just was this knowing in me that I could heal it. And I kind of had that, that feeling about a lot of things, and still do. I truly believe the body is incredible. I truly believe we can heal anything. I wouldn't say it's always an easy path, but I definitely think it's something we can do. So I started going down my own route of healing, and it was probably in my late 20s/early 30s that I was completely, so it was a journey. It was a journey of, I guess, relearning things about my body, understanding my body, also seeking support from other practitioners. I worked with a Chinese medicine practitioner. I did also do some more emotional work as well, because lots of these ailments definitely have emotional attachments as well. So by my I think it was around late 20s. Yes, it was, because it was when we moved. We lived in Victoria and we moved to northern New South Wales, where we are now. And by then I was completely symptom free. Didn't have any painful cycles, didn't have any symptoms associated with PCOS. So totally believe I'm PCOS free. The acne cleared up. Sure, I still get, the odd breakout of a pimple, which is a great sign for me if I maybe have had too much sugar or not hydrated enough or done something. Like, that is my space. And yeah, I only had that 18 months of amenorrhea back in the early 20s. So that came back after I did some work there. So yeah, it was a huge, many years of learning about the female body and all those things that we're not taught in school, which blows my mind. So many women who I see in clinic in, 20s, sure, but even in 30s, 40s, 50s, who have gone through menopause and had no idea actually what their cycle meant, what they were going through with their cycle, that there were 4 phases in the cycle. So I learned so much during that time, and I'm so grateful for that. And it was so incredible. I just remember this moment during that time where Mum and I went for a walk together, and I had just learnt about the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, that there were different phases where there were different hormones that predominate. We would feel emotionally different. We would perhaps crave different foods. Our energy is different so much is different during these times. And I just remember being so excited about this and astounded. And I remember mentioning it to my mum, who by that stage was probably in her 60s, and her saying, "Really? There's 4 phases." I remember that just moment being like, wow, how do you not know this? How have you cycled all through your menstruation years, had 3 kids, and not known that there's 4 phases? That is very common. And I'm sure there are listeners listening now that are like, wow, there's 4 phases to the, well, there you go. Yeah, you yourself, but there's 4 phases to the cycle.
It's honestly something that I've only just come to learn. And I mean, I was literally holding back tears while you were talking, especially at the beginning, because I think to myself, so many of us have difficult periods. And I remember mine, I mean, I got mine at 11, so it was quite young. And, one of 2 girls in primary school that had their period. And so I felt a lot of shame. No one talked to me about what it was. It was a burden. It's always been a burden. That's how I grew up, and no one spoke to me about it except my older sister. But it was so painful. I'd get nauseous. It was painful and clotty for so many years, and I never spoke about my period. So, I'm 40 now, and I'm talking about my period and bowel movements. I mean, I've always loved a bowel movement conversation, but it's like I only just discovered in the last 6 months through this podcast, speaking to other women who, specialize in either, hormones or nutrition or something. And I'm just like, WTF, like, how can we not know? I can't go to my mum and ask her these things. She doesn't know. And so it is like mind blowing that you spend years and, being unwell and thinking that this is normal, and you don't want to, I know I didn't want to complain about it because it made me feel like I'm weak or that I'm lying, because other women didn't experience like the nausea and the need to almost vomit, and sometimes to vomit, because I felt so sick and the pain was so strong. And, like you, I went from specialist to specialist, gynecologists, doctors, other gynecologists, and they all kept saying there's nothing wrong. Oh, you just have endometriosis. Oh, you just have polycystic ovary syndrome. And I'm like, but I don't have any of the other symptoms. I don't have acne. I'm not overweight. I don't have like hair, a lot of hair. I have, all these things. They're like, oh yeah, but I mean, there's no other thing to explain it. So it's kind of like, that's what we're going with. And I'm like, I don't have these things. So until I gave up meat for a period of time, I suffered for a really long time. And I found that going vegetarian and starting yoga completely changed my cycles. And I had also started working with a naturopath as well. And so I find it really interesting when you talked about how you knew that the pill was just not right for you. And much in the same way, I just kept trying different things until I'm like, you know what, this feels wrong. This feels foreign. This just doesn't feel like it's meant to be. And that's when I went to a naturopath, and I'm like, I need help. And I don't know what kind of help I need, but I need help because this is what's going on. So when you get to a place where you discover all of this and you're like, holy crap, women, I didn't know, the women I'm speaking to don't know anything about their bodies or the things that they should know about, their bodies. At what point did you decide I'm going to make hormones sexy again? I'm going to tell women what's going on. I want to teach and educate women to know what is happening with their body and the things that they should know about some of the symptoms that they're experiencing.
I think it was one of those things that I just almost just fell into. Like, it wasn't, I don't know if it was necessarily a choice. So I was already practicing. At this stage, I was practicing as a nutritionist. but mainly working around just healthier eating, weight loss, all those things. And I have to admit, I never really felt fulfilled by it. I was doing it, it was fun, it was okay, but it wasn't really fulfilling me. And then it was when I went on my journey that I just remember that time, like just you talking, I was like thinking about that time. I just remember ordering so many books online. I remember looking at so many studies and just, it was like my life. I would just sit and read and learn and learn. And I just was so excited by it. And I think there was a moment in there, I can't actually remember exactly when it was, but there was definitely a moment in there where I was like, this is what I want to teach. This is what I want to do. And yeah, and then it's how the universe works too. I think I changed my business name to Luna Holistic Nutrition at that time, to be more centered around Luna, the moon, so a more moon centered nutrition. And then once I put it out there, the women just started coming. I started running workshops with a beautiful friend of mine who was also a yoga teacher and yoga therapist. And I remember just our first workshop, we did a 4-week workshop. Every week we taught the women one phase of the cycle, and we went through movement, we went through food, we went through physiology, and just the women being so astounded. We'd have women crying, we'd have women, by the end of it just saying, I can't believe I didn't know this about myself. This makes so much sense to now my world and my life and how I function. So, and I remember feeling so fulfilled, like my heart was just like, this is really what women need. They need to understand themselves better. And isn't that the greatest gift, to actually understand, yourself better? So I work in a clinic where we are, hormones based, but we are really education based. And I think that's where we differ from a lot of practitioners out there, in that, we see our clients and we go through whatever's going on for them. And rather than just write our prescription and say, here you go, this is what we want you to do, we actually spend time educating them. I'm sure sometimes it may go over their head, but I'm always like, I'm sure they're picking up snippets of this. So I'll be like, this is what's going on with your hormones. These are your hormones at this time. This is what's rising. This is what's falling. Because I want you to understand yourself better, because that was one of the greatest gifts of my life, was actually having those ailments, so that I did dive deeper into understanding myself.
I find all of this so interesting. So while that 4 stages of our cycle has come up, I've never, done a deep dive into what that is and what the cycles are, or the seasons of that cycle is. Can you tell us what those 4 phases are?
Yeah. So the 4 phases, I guess you can think of them like a circle, but because it doesn't really work in a line, because our cycle's, forever going. So you've got follicular, which is the first stage, which is when the follicles are starting to grow and you're getting closer to ovulation. You've got ovulation, you've got luteal, and you've got menstruation. So in the follicular phase, it's roughly 7 to 10 days. Your ovulatory phase is roughly 3 to 4 days. Your luteal phase is roughly 10 to 14 days. And then you've got menstruation, which is your bleed, which is roughly 3 to 7 days. So most women know ovulation and menstruation, but they don't know the other two. And the other two, especially the luteal phase, actually, are just so important in the whole cycle, and what they can tell us about the health of the woman and the emotions and feelings you experience in those times, particularly that luteal phase, which can be, when we think of each of the phases in seasons as well. So the luteal phase is like the autumn. So it can be a bit cloudy, a bit gloomy, and
A
that's
bit crabby.
yeah, and that makes sense. And that was a really big gift for me, actually, was understanding that phase and being able to teach my partner about that phase as well, and how I may be feeling during that phase, and what I may need or want. And, also for me, it really changed the dialogue in our household, where when I was in that phase, if I was feeling, grumpy or short, I would just have a little check in with myself and be like, oh yeah, I'm in my luteal phase. It's okay. My hormones are all dropping off. This is actually how I'm meant to feel right now. Sure, if you're at an extremity of that, that's a little red flag that there's potentially something going on, but you are meant to fluctuate slightly with your emotions during the cycle. So I would have a check-in with myself and be like, oh, cool, that's where I'm at. That's why I'm indecisive. That's why I'm craving more carbohydrates during that time. And have this like, it's okay. Rather than feeling like a total psycho throughout my cycle that's feeling energetic and high one day and then the next day feeling a little bit down and lethargic. I knew exactly where I was and could just have better understanding and compassion for myself. And then I would actually say to my partner, like, okay, I'm in my luteal phase. This is triggering me. And he would know then that, okay, she's in her luteals, so she might be like things that trigger her a little bit more during this time. So I just need to be aware of that. And it was really beautiful, not only to understand it myself, but to share it with him so that he could almost, like, I like to think of it like I was flowing with my cycle better and he was too.
And is it easy to track those phases? Because I know that, I mean, my cycle's 28 days. I have this app that tells me when I'm ovulating, but a lot of the times I feel like women don't know about this stuff until they're trying to fall pregnant. And then
Yes.
you are like overwhelmed because I'm like, what do you mean? When am I ovulating? Oh my God. Like, and trying to find the days and the apps and the calendar things. But again, it's like, you don't think about it until you think you're falling pregnant.
Yes.
So who are some of the women that are coming to you? Why are they coming to you? Is it mostly women who are looking to fall pregnant, or are you finding some of the, the younger ones who are realizing something's not right?
The main demographic that we currently have, and it's probably, as you know, I've written 2 books. One of them was released this year, which is a preconception book, and the other one is a postpartum book, with Nourishing Those Who Nurture, which is the other woman, like that's our business, and I have co-authored the books with a kinesiologist. So that may be why I attract more of your preconception clients, but that definitely is most of the clients that I attract. I also attract clients, like I had a woman this morning who she's got some hormonal stuff going on. She's experiencing PMS, but more to that extreme side. And this is where it's so amazing, small tweaks of the body. So the endocrine system is a full body system. It includes the gut, the colon, the liver, the thyroid, so many areas. So often we have to find, and this is where the menstrual cycle is so amazing. It's like a monthly health report card. So as women, I think we're so blessed to have this health report card that men don't have until something's usually quite major for them. I find that's when they'll come, go to the doctors or go and see someone. For us, we get this monthly health report card. If there's something a little bit off, it's like, okay, we can find where that root cause, because there's always a root cause, which generally doesn't have to do with the reproductive system itself. It actually has to do with one of those other areas in the endocrine system. But anyway, to answer your question, because I know I've gone off a little bit. So how to know where you are at in those phases, like are they easy to work out? Once you actually understand the hormonal graph as it works, yes. Your follicular phase is basically once you stop bleeding up until ovulation, and the luteal phase is after ovulation and up until when you bleed. So that's something I teach. Like I teach women how to chart their cycle, which is a lot of women who are either trying to fall pregnant or actually using it for contraception, because there's many women now that actually understand the risks of the OCP and other hormonal contraception. So they are wanting to do it naturally. And that's how we used to do it eons ago. We would use, they call it FAM, fertility awareness method. So I teach a lot of women that as well. So actually understanding when they're ovulating, when they're fertile, because a lot of us were taught, I don't know if you were taught this, I remember my parents, and probably because they didn't understand it, I remember my parents always being like, make sure you use protection, you can get pregnant at any time. No, you can't. You can't get pregnant 28 days of your cycle. That's not true. You can get pregnant for roughly, well, the sperm can live for 4 to 5 days. The egg itself actually only lives to 12 to 24 hours. So you can roughly get pregnant 5 to 7 days, we say, of the cycle. But it's not 28 days. And I think that was drilled into so many women. And another really interesting one that I find, and I remember I didn't understand this either. I always thought that you menstruated first, not that you ovulated first. But once you actually understand the cycle, you ovulate before you menstruate. And this is where I think we still have, unplanned pregnancies are around about 50%. So there's a lot of women that are falling pregnant that aren't planning those pregnancies. And a lot of that I see in the postpartum period because women aren't understanding. And when you're breastfeeding, you don't have your cycle, but women aren't understanding that they're going to ovulate before they bleed. So I often have women come to me and they say, I fell pregnant, but I didn't even have my cycle. I was like, well, you did have your cycle, but you had the ovulation because that will come before you bleed. So you fell pregnant when you ovulated. And if you don't understand the signs that you're about to ovulate, which is cervical mucus, cervical positioning, if you have never been taught those and you don't understand those, then you would have no idea that you were ovulating at that time or about to ovulate. And that's where I think we see a lot of unplanned pregnancies.
How do you know your cervical position?
So this is something I teach people, yet myself, I could never. I just couldn't. I couldn't work out my cervical positioning. So you do actually have to insert. You insert one or two fingers, and there's an acronym. So SHOW is the acronym. So soft, high, open, wide. So if your cervix feels soft, it feels like the lips. If it feels high, if it feels open and wide, you're ovulating. When you're not ovulating, it's actually lower, harder, and closed. So it feels like the end of the nose. Something I teach women. Some women are great at it. I could never work that part out. So I can't help you too much there.
No, I get that. But then I'm like, so depending on the phases, would that then depend on if you experience pain during intercourse, or is that just a completely different kettle of fish?
Usually that's completely different. Yeah, that can be due to something else, whether there's inflammation there, whether there is fibroids, whether there is enough mucus. Mucus can play a part in that. So we only have the mucus around ovulation, which works as a lubricant. So if the woman may be drier in other times of the phases, which they can be, depending on especially what's going on with the hormones as well, there can be dryness attributed to less estrogen. So, yeah, it's usually something else to do with the pain, not so much where the cervix is positioned.
I'm like, if it feels like my nose or it feels like my lip, I feel like it might hurt. So I'm going to be really like full on about it. Yeah. So the other thing that I find interesting is the mucus stuff, right? And I have never known this ever until I, started thinking, my husband and I decided that we'd start trying. And I'm like, oh, so that mucus is normal. I thought this mucus thing was something's wrong. My whole life, I'm like, oh my God, I must have something that's wrong because I've been told I have endometriosis and that it may be around my colon. And if we went in for a laparoscopy and it is around my colon, it's high risk that I would rupture my colon during that. And I'm like, I'm not even going to go near that. So I've just taken, the route of health, wellness, food, and all those things to manage that rather than doing a laparoscopy. But so you're saying that when there is mucus there, and by mucus, that's the discharge, right? That's like the white discharge. So that's like go time.
So when we used to run workshops, the lady I ran them with used to just always handball this to me because I was obsessed with talking about mucus.
I'm so glad because I've never spoken about this and it's so uncomfortable.
Let's do it. I love it. So, and this is funny and it's not funny. It's interesting what you attributed your mucus to. So when I learnt about mucus, I was like, oh my gosh, that's what it is. So this is kind of a funny story. I remember one day I was working in a shoe shop in Melbourne while I was studying, and I remember the mucus coming in, and I thought it was arousal fluid. And I remember thinking to myself, how the freaking hell am I aroused? I'm working in the shoe shop. Like, what is going on?
Some might say shoes.
For me. So I had so many years of thinking that it was arousal fluid. No idea. No one had ever mentioned that cervical mucus was happening because of ovulation. So cervical mucus's role, whether you want to fall pregnant or not, that is why we have our cycle, right? So everything that's happening in our menstrual cycle's role is related to conception or fertility. So cervical mucus basically comes in 3 to 6 days prior to ovulation. And its role is to, I like to think of it like a roadblock and then like a slippery slide with the sperm. So what the cervical mucus does, there's 3 stages. So there's a sticky stage, which is the first stage, which is kind of like, I like to think of it like Glad glue. You might see a little bit, it's usually you see it in the morning when you wipe, so you might see a little bit on the toilet paper or you might not. That second stage is creamy and it's kind of like moisturizer. And that third stage is egg white. So when we're talking infertility awareness method, we say all cervical mucus is fertile if someone's trying to not fall pregnant. But if you are trying to conceive, yes, it's all fertile as such, but really that egg white mucus is the mucus that is going to allow the sperm and egg to meet. Now, it's the egg that meets the sperm. It's the egg that chooses the sperm. We've thought for so many years that it's the sperm that chooses the egg. It's the egg that chooses the sperm. So the cervical mucus, that egg white mucus, basically allows for that to happen. But the creamy and the sticky basically works like a roadblock between the sperm and the egg. But while it's working like a roadblock, it's nourishing it. It's because the sperm can live for 4 to 5 days. It's nourishing that sperm before that slippery slide is there for those two to meet. So it's pretty amazing.
That's fascinating. Oh my God. And I have this, like, I don't know if you remember the movie, Look Who's Talking. Do you remember that movie?
Yes.
So at the beginning of the movie, there's the egg and then there's the sperm and there's all these voices and it's going in. And I'm like, that's how I just thought it happened. That's like, that was my education into how that implanting happens. So that is so interesting to me because I've wondered for so long, I say so long, since last year, how that whole thing of, how does the sperm stay alive for so long in my body and not like die. And now that makes sense. And then that whole slippery slide thing, that's so funny because like I can visualize it. I'm like, okay, now it's like, whoa, ready to go, type thing.
If you are trying to fall pregnant, or even if you're not, so when you get that slippery slide, it's the peak egg white mucus. Usually you'll feel that when you wipe, but if you want to, check it out, it's quite interesting. And a lot of my clients do this. So if you actually put it between your 2 fingers and stretch it, that sticky and creamy won't stretch, but that egg white will stretch. So it totally makes sense that the sperm can swim through that. And on that sperm point too, something else that I just love, I just love all this stuff. I totally geek out, is that the male sperm is fast but dies quickly, whereas the female sperm is slow but lives longer. Of course we do.
I'm like, isn't that the whole point of like, not the point, but women live longer than men anyway? Like, I just feel like we just seem to be outdoing them in so many ways. And yet in our society, we're like squashed like ants every day.
So a lot of, not a lot, but I definitely have women come to me that are like, but I wasn't even ovulating. And I was like, well, when did you have sex? And they're like, oh, like 4 days before ovulation. And I was like, yeah, the sperm can live that long. And generally when that happens, it's a female, because the female sperm has lived longer than that male sperm. The male sperm's done. They've tried to get there. They can't get there. They've died. So it's usually a girl that will happen when you've had conception further away from ovulation. Not always, but usually.
I don't know why, but I am so proud right now of females. Like, I just feel I'm actually tearing up because I'm like, oh my God, like that's so miraculous. Like, it's magic. Like, that's so beautiful. Oh my God, you go girls, all you girls, you go girls. You fought harder. Man.
I love that.
Oh, and I love that someone's geeking out about it because, earlier you said that, your parents were like, make sure you use protection and stuff like that. I come from a culture where you don't have sex until you're married and you don't talk about it. You don't talk about intimacy. You don't talk about poos. You don't talk about, no one, in the world of my parents and every other parents that I know from my culture, no one's having sex until they're married, and only for the purpose of falling pregnant. So that is a woman's role in my culture.
Yeah.
And so no one spoke to me about these things. I've had to find it out myself. And then you can't talk to anyone about it unless generally they're out of your culture. And which is ridiculous given, I'm 40 and that's still a thing. You would think that in this day and age that would have kind of moved on, but it really hasn't for my culture. And so it really makes me wonder why women have been kept so in the dark about their own bodies and about the absolute magical processes that we experience that are to be celebrated rather than to be feeling ashamed of, which is how I felt my whole life until I had this podcast and I started talking to amazing women like you in the space that are doing, spending their life dedicating to the education of women about women and womanhood.
I mean, it's such a blessing. And I still, when women kind of say, "Oh gosh, I got my period back," postpartum, because that's another sector I work a lot in. Like, "Oh, I got it back," and I'm like, "Yeah, incredible! Like, how great!" Because now you get to the emotional sides of, or the physiology around those 4 phases is so magic too. Once you actually are flowing with it, in those first couple of weeks, you usually feel more like brainstorming. You usually feel more like socializing. Around ovulation, you usually want to give more to other people. In the luteal phase, you can become a little bit more inner, and then you might want to do some more art or do something creative. And actually, in the menstruation phase, this is pretty wild and amazing. I think it was South American. I'm pretty sure it was South Americans tribes used to, because often women would bleed together too, because we were more in sync with nature and the moon and living together. So they would bleed together, and the men would actually create a space for them, and the women would go and bleed, and the men would wait, because during that time, your left and right hemispheres of your brain are firing so much that your intuition is so incredible. And if you start tapping into this, you'll see. And so they would wait for the women to come back to tell them where to go to hunt and to live next, because they just really honored how intuitive that phase was for women.
Sorry, this is the luteal. This is the crabby phase.
This is the menstruation. This is when you're
Okay.
bleeding.
I was going to say, because there is no intuition during my crabby
No,
phase.
no. That's usually an indecisive time, a time where
Yeah,
you're
make no decisions that week, girlfriends. Yeah, I've learned that. I've learned that like last year.
yeah.
Make no decisions. Even down to, for any of the women that are listening, I have heard that it is the worst time to make a decision about dating or about sleeping with someone,
Yes.
connections. Like, do not go on dates during that phase.
So it makes sense too that the phase that's the best in is your follicular and your ovulation phase. It makes sense that they're the times to actually find your partner. And this is something we used to always say in our workshops too. You often want to break up with your partner, husband, whoever they are, during that luteal phase. Don't do it. Wait until you've menstruated. And then if during menstruation you're like, yeah, nah, I got to let this guy go. Sure, do that. But don't be doing that in the luteal phase. Just give yourself another week or two. Hold it out.
I have found, it's funny. My husband listens to the podcast, so he'll hear this and he keeps hearing some tidbits that I, wouldn't normally share in our day-to-day life.
Yeah.
But there are times that I'm just like, I have to talk myself out of physically shaking him down sometimes during my crabby phase, because I already struggle with patience, because I don't like, for me, anyone who dawdles or, takes a long time to action things, excuse me, or I call it the faffing.
That's faffing. Love it.
I can't deal with faffing. During that week before I'm, having my bleed, that faffing, I'm going to like break fingers, because I'm like, I start twitching. And so I have to literally walk out of the room. I've learned, I'm like, I walk out of the room, I go somewhere dark, and it's usually the bathroom because it's dark and cool. And I just like breathe it out. So I'm like, I have learned to, not take any action, not make any decisions, not have any like conversations about your relationships that you need to have. Like, do not take anything serious into your hands during those days. Lesson learned.
Lesson learned. And during our follicular phase, which is the time after bleeding and before ovulation, communication is at its best. So that's the time to communicate, to ask for those pay rises, to do whatever you need to do in that big communication space. That's the time to do it. But that's so great that you've learned that about yourself and you're able to step away from the situation. I can totally relate to that. And we're just about to, I'm currently have a 9-month-old, so I'm breastfeeding. So I'm not actually cycling. However, I still can feel the subtleties of it happening more so along with the moon. Like I'm like, oh yeah, I'm feeling like I'm luteal now. And that's a really cool, like if you aren't cycling, you can just create like a 20-day, they call it a moon map. You can find them just if you Google it. And by the way, you don't have to be, 28 days isn't the be all end all. If you have a cycle from 26 to 34 days, great. So you can add on some extra days if you need or take some off. But if you print out 3 of these moon maps, and if you just write in each day a word on how you're feeling, happy, sad, whatever it is, it's pretty amazing to see over those 3 months how similar they are. And, we did this with our first group too, and it was really amazing. On the last week of our workshop, we got the women to actually just call out, like we'd go to each phase and call out the words, and they were so similar. And it was so incredible to actually see that in a group dynamic, that women were feeling so similar during those phases. So, yeah, I can see that in myself now. And we're just about to go camping soon. And I feel like I'm going to be in that luteal. And I really struggle with the packing of the car because it's a slow process. And I was like, so what can we do so that I don't get really... I'll go for a big walk while you pack the car or something, because the faffing really triggers me.
Oh, I am so glad I'm not the only one, because I find that because I have not known about my phases or about my moods and about even though I'm quite intuitive, I know something's not right in my body. Like I feel it, and my husband always says, like, it's amazing that you know something's coming, because I do. But the fact that, we've been taught to not pay attention to any of those signs that actually come with the cycles, and then you don't know that you're going through that phase, and then you don't know that things are going to irritate you.
Yes.
And so you beat yourself up over it. I beat myself up for being such a mean bizatch. I'm like, I'm a horrible person. And I would talk to myself in that way for so long. And until I realized, I'm like, no, I think I just need to remove myself from wherever I am and sit in a dark, cold place that's not depressing. So I love my bathroom. We had it renovated and it's gorgeous. So I'm happily sitting there. But it's the only way that I can manage certain things sometimes, to just be on the tiles, the coolness of the tiles. And so I'm really interested. You keep bringing up the moon.
Mm.
Talk to me about how our cycles are connected with the moon, and why not the sun?
So, well, that's interesting. I don't know if I have an answer to why the moon and not the sun.
Maybe tell me why the moon, and then I'll theorize why not the sun.
So I guess it has to do with the moon being in phases and the sun's not in phases. That's what comes up for me. But, I don't know the exact answer to that one. But when women used to cycle with the moon, they would either have a red moon cycle or a white moon cycle. So a red moon cycle would be when you are bleeding with a full moon, and a white moon cycle would be when you are ovulating on a full moon. And they believed, and it's really interesting because I see women switch between these two cycles, and I'm always like, what's going on in your life at this time? And it's so interesting. So a white moon cycle was known to be, and I'm not saying you can't fall pregnant if you're not on this cycle, but a white moon cycle was known to be more fertile. And it makes sense. When the moon is full, if you look into biodynamics, which is, planting and consuming food and doing all that harvesting with the moon cycles, they would harvest at a full moon because that's when there'd be a lot of nutrients in the soil. And so I guess the same thing applies when you're ovulating with the full moon. There's a lot of nutrients going on. And so they would classify that as the fertile cycle. And the red moon cycle, when you're bleeding on a full moon, would be more, for lack of a better word, they would call it like the red witch cycle. And that is when you're in, basically just means you're in a more giving phase. And I've seen that within myself, and I've seen that with other women, where I'm like, oh, I'm in a phase more so now where I'm definitely not thinking about having children. I'm actually in a phase of just giving and, completing my Swadharma, my soul purpose, and just supporting women. And when I'm in that other cycle, I'm like, oh yeah, I do feel like I'm more in, that fertile cycle and perhaps thinking about children. So a lot of women don't actually cycle with the moon at this moment. Some do, but there's so many factors now in the world we live in. The biggest one definitely being blue light, which actually stops the body from naturally forming that natural circadian rhythm with the moon. But I do find if women live more in nature or are more in tune with nature, and it doesn't mean they have to live in nature, they can live in an apartment, but ensuring that they're not getting a lot of blue light, ensuring they're connecting to the ground, ensuring they're at least looking at the moon and the sun daily, then they perhaps will cycle with the moon more, because it's a more natural form of cycling, I guess. It's the way that nature intended. And why, I don't know. That's a really great question. I have no idea.
So many things are coming up for me, right? Because I am a very proud tinfoil conspiracy theorist hat wearing person. And, there are all these conversations about the moon being hollow and, the dark side of the moon and the evidence of these things, that the moon hasn't been with the earth for its entire life. Like the moon came in. So I'm like, who brought the moon in? Who decided to bring it into the orbit? And then that magnetic field holding them together in this beautiful dance that it now has something to do with our cycles. So my brain's going like ding, ding, ding. I can't help but think of all these things that I want to look up now about the moon and why our cycles are connected. And interestingly enough, I found out recently that while I have always known this to be true for myself in the sense that I don't believe in time, the whole thing about how our calendar has been created so that we are completely out of sync with the moon. Originally it was a 28-day, every month should be 28 days, which then becomes even, and there'd be no such thing as a leap year. And we've been taken out of that cycle, which therefore means that the moon cycles are completely off every month, the month that we currently go by. And so there are just so many rabbit holes I am very prepared to go down now that you're telling me all this stuff. Yeah.
I am also a proud conspiracy theorist. And I remember when David Icke talks a lot about the moon.
Oh God, yeah.
I was like, oh, I just can't, because I guess because of the work I do. And do you know what's interesting? And I forgot to mention this. So the moon definitely controls the tides. We see that now that I live closer to the ocean as well. I really see that when it's a full moon, the tides are high. And the ocean, in terms of ocean and land on the earth, is around about 70%. So 70% water. And what are our bodies? Around about 70%. So it makes sense in that way that, of course, the moon is going to affect us. But then what about men? It's really interesting. Not sure. And
I hadn't made that connection before, that, our body's full of, that much water. And then why wouldn't we resonate with the moon? And it's interesting because I instinctively know it's a full moon all the time. Like I don't actually follow a moon calendar. I'm just like, oh, I feel like it's a full moon. Something's going on. And I'll look outside and it's a full moon. How can women connect to this energy? Is it just about learning the cycles of the moon and then paying attention to our symptoms? Like, is it that moon mapping?
Yeah, so you can do that when you do the moon mapping, which is such a simple way to do it. So depending what one you find to download and print, a lot of them actually have the moon cycle on it. So day one is day one of your bleed. So day one of your bleed, you can find, just Google where are we in terms of the moon cycle, and then on your map, find where that phase of the moon cycle is and start writing what you're feeling. And then I feel like that creates the connection. And I guess just looking up to the sky and seeing what the moon is. I know so many years I didn't do that. I never looked up to the sky to see what the moon was until I really got into this work. It's interesting too, and I know some spiritual teachers who will speak of the moon as being like a dark energy and the sun being that light energy. And sure, we definitely, in terms of vitamin D and warmth and all those things, we definitely take beautiful light energy from the sun. But yeah, I have met teachers that won't even talk about the moon. They're like, nope, such a dark energy. I actually don't even want to, we don't even talk about the moon. That's there, but we focus on the sun. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I wonder why. Anyway, whatever they've got going on, right?
Yeah.
They're two beautiful things in our sky that get to glow. We saw a moonrise. My husband and I were at a wedding somewhere out in the middle of nowhere in Victoria, and we stayed on a property, it's a huge property, and we were just sitting outside because we love stars.
No.
And when you go out to the middle of nowhere and you look up, you literally see a belt of stars, and it's the most miraculous thing in the world. And so we were just sitting there, it was really, really dark. And all of a sudden, like in front of us, quite a bit away, but there's like kind of like hills and mountains and what have you. It was like something was on fire. And I'm like, what is that? I'm like, oh my God, is that the spaceship coming to get me? No, but I had a moment and I was like, yes, they're coming and I get to see it. But we just slowly were watching and I'm like, something's on fire. And Mark's like, I don't think so. But like, it looks like there's like a light, like a car. I'm like, but it's consistent and it's moving. And then we realized the moon was rising. And so we just sat and watched the moon rise. I had never thought in my life I'd watch a moon rise. I just didn't think it rose. Do you know what I mean? And ever since then, I've been obsessed with looking outside and looking at the moon. Oh, such beautiful things that we know so little about, I feel. And I sometimes feel overwhelmed, Talia, because I'm like, these are things that our ancestors knew to do. And while I feel like I am trying to learn, I have to unlearn so many things before I absorb this. And I feel like it's the wisdom's there, but it's the unlearning that has to happen so that you can tap into that intuition and that ancient wisdom that is literally in all of our DNA
Totally.
that we just have no idea how to access.
I mean, yeah, there's so many elements to that, isn't it? And I know for me particularly, like I grew up in Melbourne for the first 30 years of my life, and I've only been up here for 10 years, and we live on gorgeous property. And so I do connect more to those things now because we live on property and we do see the beautiful night sky and we see the moon, and it's so incredible when there's a full moon and the sun will set at the same time that the moon is rising over the ocean, and it's amazing. But that's not how I grew up, and it's only been in these last 10 years that I've actually connected to that a lot more. And it is like a remembering. It's like, this is how it was. We used to be so much more connected to all these things, and we're now so disconnected from so much of Mother Nature and Earth. And it's so interesting too, just in like a clinic space, I guess. When people come with so many ailments and symptoms, honestly, if you just got back to nature, if you watched the sun rise, if you watched the moon rise, if you just grounded your feet on earth, if you drank spring water, if you did, so many things, if you got 15 minutes at least of sun per day, I'm sure overall there'd be a lot of us that are a lot more healthier.
Do you think that there's been a shift towards this side of wellness in the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely. But I feel like that shift has come for a few reasons, actually. And I think one of them has been that I guess I see more women than men. I do see some men, but I see more women. But they're not feeling 100%, and they know that they're not feeling the best versions of themselves, and they know that they can be. So I definitely feel like people are putting more emphasis on this, probably because there are so many more ailments, diseases, all these things around that people are either hearing of or experiencing themselves. And it's cool that it's actually become like a cool thing to do now, is be part of the wellness space and do all these things.
And it's funny that it's being also called a right wing thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just ridiculous.
Yes. It's funny how it's seen like that. If you are wanting to invest in your health and your wellness, then some people are like, what? How
Yeah.
weird of you to want to actually do that.
Mm. I want to talk about your books because I just think that it's such a beautiful contribution. I love the name of it. Nourishing Those Who Nurture, for me, just feels so yummy. So tell me about the books. How did that come about? Why the authoring?
So the first book actually came about in my first postpartum. So I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 9-month-old. And I went into my first postpartum thinking, I got this. I'm in the health and wellness industry. I know what's going on. I've got my belly band. I've got my arnica homeopathics. Like, I'm it. And when I was in it, I was like, whoa, this is actually so much more than I expected it to be. And I was grateful that I had women around me, practitioners, people, community that I would connect with. And I also had the knowledge to be able to look up when things were going on and try and work out things for myself as well. But I basically wanted a tangible book to have all these things in, because I love books. I still love books. I cannot get into the Kindle and all those things where you're reading online. I'd love to just read a book. So in that postpartum, I always feel when you birth too, you birth a new version of yourself. And I always feel really creative in that postpartum period. So in that postpartum, I was like, yeah, I really want to do this book and I want women to have this book. And I worked alongside Caitlin, who's an incredible kinesiologist, but she's also done some shamanic work. So she's written a lot of the book that talks about, I guess, more the emotional slash spiritual, maybe not so much spiritual, but more on the emotional side of things. So it started actually just as a cookbook, because my background is as a nutritionist, but then it became so much more than that. So that was our first book, which we released in 2021. And then I'm very passionate about preconception. And I had a preconception phase for all my children. They all varied in how they looked and length and everything I did during those phases. But it was something that both my partner and I consciously put in energy, time, and money into. And it was really important for us. And back when I first did that 9 years ago, people thought I was mad. Like, why are you spending this time and money and focusing your energy on your preconception? Just have sex and have a baby. And I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, I want to be the best version of myself, and so does my partner when we conceive. Like, doesn't that make sense? 50% of the DNA is him and 50% is me. So that's something I've always been really passionate about. And so it seems funny that we wrote the postpartum book first, but it was just where I was at that time and what I was wanting to bring to the world. And then we wrote the preconception book, and that was released August 2024, so last year. So yeah, it's been they're both really easy to read, beautiful books, which I am yet to send to you and I will get to you. So there's something that's accessible, and that's the main comment we've been getting, which is something that was really important to us. They're accessible to everyone. We're both practitioners. We can talk, in much length about pathways and methylation and all these things, but you don't need to. It just needs to be simple so that women and men can actually understand what's going on and support themselves during these phases. So yeah, it's been a really fun, I guess. I always say I'm not very creative, but I guess that's been my creative outlet to author these books.
And what a beautiful contribution. I mean, we spoke offline how I had miscarried. And one of the things that I found when I first fell pregnant, the first thing I did is I went and got like books, right? And because I love books. I sold my Kindle. I've been trying to do audiobooks while I drive because I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm like, no, let me try and listen to a book.
Yes.
Which it's a little harder. If the person who's
Can't do it yet.
reading it isn't great, it's just really hard to listen to. So,
yeah.
But the first thing I literally did was I went and got 2 books, and I just found that a lot of the books were super medical and clinical and dry, and I found it really hard to connect with them. And so I was just like, oh, I'll just get these 2 for now. And, once I get to the next phases, I'm sure I'll discover more books along the way. I'll start asking people once we tell people, which we never got to because I miscarried at 10 weeks, what they would recommend.
Yes.
And so one of the things, I mean, I would have loved to have seen a book, that I would be able to, make food for myself, because that's the thing that I struggled with the most. I think I was just like, I already was aware of the fact that the first trimester is the riskiest. And so I was so stressed about what I should be eating, what I shouldn't be eating. I just thought to myself, as long as it's not processed and as long as it's not raw, that's what I'm sticking to. So I just kept it really clean, and which I, for the most part, I eat quite clean anyway. But when you think of all the things that you've learned up until now, all the things that you now know about yourself, about the cycles, about womanhood, all the things that you've learned. I mean, you've home birthed all your children, which is just miraculous to me. I love that. What's something that you wish you knew sooner?
I know we've been talking about it a lot, so it seems like perhaps that's it. But honestly, really understanding my menstrual cycle, so understanding those 4 phases, I just feel like that has been such a pivotal learning for me that has shifted so much in my life. And I wish I had have known that sooner.
What's the thing that you're most proud of?
Probably absolutely my children, like
Mm.
number one. Birthing them, having 3 gorgeous births on our beautiful land, and just, yeah, conceiving them and bringing them into this world, absolutely.
Were they similar in experience for the home births?
No, they were all very different, but they were all very beautiful. I think one of my sons is trying to come in on this talk too.
He's like, Mummy, you're talking about me. I
Crazy
can feel it.
Um, and there was a lot of work that we did in preparation for that, mainly around, I guess, my mental state and just how I experienced pain. I don't see birth as painful, but my first one was around. I had the same midwives for all my births, which was really
Beautiful.
special. But my first one was around 30 hours. My second one was 5 hours, and my most recent was 90 minutes.
Wow.
Very different with how, and it's so interesting because it didn't actually have anything to do. Time is so bizarre and nuanced during that. It actually didn't have anything to do with the time. Like in terms of actually the pushing birthing phase, my 90-minute baby was definitely the most intense in that. But in terms of, I guess, the longevity, obviously, the 30-hour one, in terms of just, the longevity in that, that was definitely, I guess, challenging for me. But going into that, we were doing a lot of meditation, a lot of, I guess I'd done a lot of mind work I had, previous to my children, I was a runner and I had done a lot of really long runs. So, I'd pushed myself beyond my capacity in times. And I think that really helped me in my births to be like, okay, I'm here, but I can go further. I've got this. And I mean, having it home for me personally is where I felt most safe and supported. So that was really, I'm really blessed that it turned out that way, because I know that's not the case for everyone. So I feel really grateful for that. And that was something I actually had to work with in my last birth. Was I'd had 2 amazing births, and I thought to myself, I can't have 3 amazing births. And so I had to really work with that. I guess what I was telling myself, that I can't have 3 births. Like, of course I can. And I did. And they were amazing. So, yeah, I definitely feel like there's a really big mental, emotional element to birth that isn't spoken about so much, which played a really huge role in how and why I was able to have such beautiful home births.
That is such an important call out. I think that, for me, even when I was thinking about becoming a mum, I took a lot of time to decide, because for a really long time I was like, you know what, I'm good. I don't need the children. Like a lot of I find women are really desperate to fill a void. And I'm like, we have a really good life. We now have 2 dogs. We had 1 dog when we decided to start trying, but I was like, I don't have that emptiness that I feel like some women have. And so then I thought, well, if I want to be a mum, what do I need to do to prepare for that? How can I make space for that? And there was a woman that I had early on in the podcast that was the advice that she gave. She's like, make space for a child in your life before you conceive, because then you're actually inviting that soul into your life, basically. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to put it, because up until the moment where you fall pregnant, then you have a baby, I don't think enough of us consider creating an actual mental, emotional space. It's just a physical space that we work on.
Yes.
And so when I decided to, I went to do Chinese medicine. I did 3 intensive months of acupuncture and Chinese medicine to work on a whole bunch of things. But I didn't realize just how much of that work was spiritual and emotional and mental for me. And it was so like, it completely changed the way I look at cycles. That was the thing that really made it click for me, because I remember the moment that I had a profound emotional uh, emotional experience with my doctor of Chinese medicine, that I felt a physical attachment from my heart to my womb. And my period after that was like someone had done uh, a clean out. It just was really dark, and it wasn't painful, but I felt like I was letting something go.
Yeah.
And she was like, it's because you've cleaned house. You just you've been disconnected from your womb space for so long. And now that that connection has been established, it's time to clean house. And I literally fell pregnant straight away within 5 days. So I was like, yes, woohoo, doing all the things. Granted, I miscarried, but that's a whole other story. But I just think that not enough women understand, maybe know, or are guided to doing the work before you fall pregnant. That preconception stuff is huge. And to include your partner, like I said to my husband, please, the coffee, the alcohol, not that he drinks a lot, but I'm like, we need to do some clean house of your health too, because it's not just about me. And that pressure, to take that pressure off from me was huge, because a lot of the time we think it's all on us. And if the pregnancy doesn't, if it fails, it's all on us. And I'm like, hang on a second. It's like you just said, it's half your husband and half you. So, like, why that pressure on us, do you think?
Do you know what's so interesting? And I guess it's because we carry the child, but we actually, in our preconception book, there's a whole chapter on emotional prep, which is really beautiful that Caitlin did. But, in terms of miscarriage itself, the statistics are like 40% perhaps something going on with the woman, 40% perhaps something going on with the male, and 20% unknown. But I think because we are carrying the baby, and I just think that's something that I think it's a generational unlearning, or that it's all about the woman. And when I first started working in this space and working with preconception clients, I would say to them, they'd book their sessions and I would say, make sure your partner comes along. And honestly, 9 times out of 10 years ago, partners weren't coming along. Whereas now they are, which is amazing to see that shift and that partners are getting involved. But it's something that I still think there needs to be a lot more emphasis and learning about. And that, like we said, just before, like 50% of the DNA is from the sperm. Why wouldn't we want, the partner to be in best shape, health possible, so that DNA is incredible? And, these complications that occur in pregnancy can be because of the sperm. It's not always because of the egg. So it makes sense, but I think it's a real relearning, because so much of that for so many generations was just women's business put on the women, and men weren't really involved.
There is such an unlearning piece, 100%. And then I think that there is also a responsibility piece.
Mm.
You said earlier that men don't generally go to the doctor and stuff like that. They're not like us in the sense that we feel something and we want to work out what it is, whereas they will just keep it on the burner until it's too late, or
literally
it's really bad.
The legs falling off and they're taking themselves there finally.
It's like covered in bacterial infections and things, and you're just like, I think you need to do something about that now. So I get that they're hesitant, but for me that says more men are starting to take responsibility. And it's also such a supportive thing you can do for your partner. It is really hard for women. There are some men that listen to this podcast, right? And outside of my husband, I'm not really sure why some other men listen to this podcast. However, I love that men listen to this podcast. But to understand, they'll never understand what women go through when it comes to this conception stuff. I feel like there's so much pressure to fall pregnant, and then to stay pregnant, and then to get through pregnancy without looking, like a whale that's been beached, and then trying to get our bodies back, and then bouncing back into being who we were beforehand. There will never be a bouncing back to who you were beforehand.
Yeah.
I am trying really hard not to be fixated by your pendant. Is that the body of a woman on your pendant?
It is. I mean, of course I wear that.
Yeah.
So a bit closer. And actually, one of my beautiful clients, this is some work she does. She lives up here. I'm going to just spruik her business because it's beautiful.
Please do. It is gorgeous.
It's too, but I won't show you because I'm a bit, I won't show you.
You tried. It's okay. Yeah.
It's called Two in the Sun, or TITS is the acronym for it. And I have been wearing that since I got that from her, and I love it. So many people comment on it.
It's beautiful. It is beautiful. And I'm like, I'm going to wait till the end, because for me, it's a piece that I just think, when I think of what I love about being a woman and what I love about womanhood, no one yet has I don't think, I'm trying to remember, I don't think anyone has brought up how beautiful our bodies are and how miraculous our bodies are. Maybe the osteo that I interviewed, but I would love to know what you love about being a woman.
That's so funny because, the first thing that comes to me is exactly what you have just said. Um, but in the concept, and it still blows my mind. So I've actually been pregnant 4 times. I miscarried my first baby too. But every time, I think a woman's body being able to hold a pregnancy, carry a human, birth a human, and then to feed that human for however many months the woman can do so, still blows my mind. When I am pregnant, I'm like, what? There is a tiny human inside there who is growing and living inside of me. How? And I remember saying to my partner, actually, when I was pregnant last, like, I feel a bit bad for you that you can't experience that. He was very happy not to be experiencing that, apparently, but I think that is so incredible. So I think a woman's body and her ability to be able to do that is literally magic.
It really is. And I think it was in my last episode, I just thought to myself, at the beginning of this podcast, I just couldn't understand why women kept talking about women being magic. I'm like, I don't understand why we keep being called magic. Season 3, I totally get it. It's almost like I've connected to my magic, and I totally get that every woman is magic. It's one of those things that magic to me is something that you experience but can't explain.
Mm-hmm.
And every day of womanhood for me seems to feel that way now, that I'm like, wow, there is so much to us that we've forgotten. There's so much to us that we know. There is so much to us that we are yet to accept. There is so much to us that we are yet to give permission to being. And the thriving of womanhood to me is in that, right? To give ourselves permission to really get to know who we are, get to know what our bodies are capable of and what we're capable of when we come together to do the work that you're doing, especially in the space for women, that I just feel so inspired by. And I please tell the listeners where they can find you, how they can work with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been such a beautiful chat too. I've just loved every moment of it, and it's like re-inspired me. It's nice to have these beautiful chats to feel re-inspired by all that I'm doing and being like, yes, this is the path I'm meant to be on. So you can find me. The clinic I work at, which I've co-founded with a beautiful friend of mine who's a naturopath, is the Hormone Suite. We're on Instagram, and also we have a website. And then our book is Nourishing Those Who Nurture. And I have my own Instagram page, which is at Tahlia_Nutritionist. So you can find me there.
I love that. And I love that you just said that. And there is so much room to be inspired by what you do. So please keep doing the things. Please, please.
Thank you.
For the listeners, if you are interested in connecting with Tahlia, I will include in the episode description and across socials links and ways you can do that. So if you haven't already, head on over to Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram and follow the Skin I'm In podcast to be the first to know when new episodes drop. Tahlia, thank you so much for being a guest on the Skin I'm In podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm glad we made it work.
I never thought I'd say this, but I love when women geek out about hormones, bowel movements, and now periods. Truly, I never thought I'd be so inspired by a conversation about blood, tissue, and mucus that excretes from our crevice. When I think of growing up and some of the experiences that I had, my cycles have always come with so much shame for me. Getting your period was a sign of womanhood. And when I think about how I felt when I got mine, I felt threatened at the thought of losing my youth, threatened by the idea that I now had to change and become a woman. Not that I even knew what that meant, but it scared me. And threatened by the attention of boys and the impact it had on my psyche, on my body, and how I felt about my body. And to me, periods meant pregnancy. And for some reason, I felt shame around that too. And I was only like 11 years old, 12 years old. I didn't know anything about being pregnant or how that happened. I just felt shame. So it's interesting to me that I've come to learn in the last 12 months that I associated motherhood with being burdened. And that for me came out of feeling like a burden to my own mother. to her mother and to my sister, who played the role of mother to me for most of my life. So naturally, the weight of that belief system was bearing down on me really heavily, especially when I decided that, yes, I want to be a mum. And the trauma I've stored around that in my body is causing some significant health issues in my life. For those who are new to the show, my commitment to healing trauma is the most important journey I take in this lifetime. It's where I spend all of my money, my time, and my efforts. It's literally the thing that I talk about on this podcast, in conversations with my friends, self-development, that excavation work, and my commitment to healing my trauma, whether it's from this lifetime or from past lifetimes. And as I do my excavation work around the traumas my body holds on motherhood, sexuality, and connection with women and safety, I become so aware of the parts of me that need healing and how those parts are deeply connected to the way my internal systems function, and as a result, how I experience womanhood. It hasn't been great, I'll be honest, and I hated being a woman up until only a few years ago. And it's only now that I'm 40 that I really feel like I'm understanding what it means to be a woman and the power I have as a woman to create life and nourish my health. The deeper conversations like this go, and the more frequently they occur, the wider my brain feels like it's opening to absorb information that I feel like I already knew. It feels familiar, but at some point, I've forgotten it. My mind is blown at the mastery it would have taken the divine to create us down to the detail of our mucus, altering its consistency to nourish, protect, and deliver sperm to our eggs for fertilization. I am still trying to comprehend this fact. And after this conversation with Talia, I feel so much more love and connection to my uterus, a gratitude to my cycles, and oddly, very oddly, quite proud of the mucus I now know more about. It feels very strange to say all of these things. Talia has truly inspired me to dig deeper, to pay more attention to my body, and to ask my higher self for answers, to be guided by my intuition, to have more conversations about how our body works. It's crazy. Talia's so right. We have no idea how our body works. And her passion for this space honestly has left me emotional because, on one hand, Talia really suffered to get on her journey to wellness. And on the other hand, it was all part of the divine plan to get Talia from where she was to being on the path of her soul's journey and helping other women heal the way she had to learn to heal herself. Honestly, just saying that fills me up because I know that for so many of us, our bodies are a place of shame, of neglect, of concern, of criticism, and the suffering we endure because of what our body looks like or doesn't look like, or what it can do and what it can't do. It's a real obstacle in the lives of so many of us. I didn't feel like I failed when I miscarried, but I saw it in my husband's eyes. That feeling of, I wonder what we did wrong. And I know, mentally I know, and in my heart I know we didn't do anything wrong. It just wasn't meant to be. But there's still that unconditioning and that unlearning that needs to happen. But if we just listen to what our body is saying, the signs she shows us of what she needs when she needs it, our capacity to heal is infinite. And it almost feels like that's our soul's calling. It's there where I believe we will find our greatest gift and the connection we have to the all-knowing source that guides us the way the moon guides the tides. This conversation has moved me in a way I just didn't know was possible. I'm really so deeply grateful to be a woman in this time in Earth's life cycle. And where I used to see darkness above us, I now see so much light with gratitude and grace. Have a wonderful day.